Welcome again to the Developer Tribe. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and to everyone who I've had the chance to connect with so far. This podcast delves into the processes and practices of coaches, educators and beyond, offering us their insight and giving us cause to reflect. Thank you for being here, however you got here. And with that, let's jump in. My guest today is Greg Dreyer, previously head of physical education for 15 years in inner city London schools, now director for the Centre for Physical Education, Sport and Activity at Kingston University. Via this, he co-runs the podcast Beyond the Square, discussing practice in physical education. He is also the founder of the miMove app that helps support and develop activity into part of the lives of young people. The app is currently used in 130 schools over 20 countries, with over 60,000 students using it to support their physical activity journeys. Greg's career has been truly about using sport and physical activity for all the positive benefits to young people they can provide, and refining our role as adults in that provision. Greg, thanks for joining us today. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me on. And thanks for the intro.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us about your career and what brought you to develop the miMove app.
Wow, that's a long journey. Once you get to my stage in career, it's been a very privileged career, I suppose. I've been able to work in a field that I've always loved. I think my motivations and reasons have probably ebbed and flowed, changed. When I think of setting out as a young undergraduate, I was really fortunate to have a good undergraduate journey that was a good university on a course, a 4-year undergrad BA course that they're very rare these days, but that's another story. But it set me up well, I think, looking back, and not only was it technically sound, but those big questions that have really been the drivers in my career were the intrigue and curiosity around those big questions was sparked by having being lucky enough to be taught by some outstanding critical theorists who, I hasten to add, weren't within physical education, which was my major, as they would say in the States. So then I always wanted to go back and work in inner London. I did that for 15, 16 years. And then I was really curious about movement development. That was becoming a really big thing. We're talking like in the early noughties now. So we did a load of work away from school we set up a private entity at the time. That was the only way we could really get things off the ground, and very interested in children's movement journeys and how they develop movement competency. So I was really lucky to work with 3-year-olds through to 7-year-olds, and then we extended to 14-year-olds as the entity grew. But it means that over my career, I've worked with 3-year-olds all the way through to postgrads and in-service teachers and coaches. I've always coached away from school, so I guess our worlds collide there. And then a few years ago, it dawned on me that we spend so much time and effort and energy and resources getting kids into activity, and there was a big piece of the jigsaw missing, and that's knowing how and if they are engaging with activity. And for me, it's always been about the quality of the experience, and really become increasingly fascinated throughout in the work I've been able to do in higher education as to what creates an environment in which young people are likely to stay in physical activity, what motivates them to stay in physical activity, and I guess our worlds would collide there as well. And also become acutely aware of in both theory and practice as to what drives them away from physical activity and sport. So the app was really a way of capturing their experience and connecting stakeholders to create, I guess, a digital ecosystem around each individual kid where teacher, coach, parent, and most importantly, the child is really on the same page and it's driven by the child's experience. So it's a really simple app. I'm not a sports scientist, and the app reflects, I guess, my values, my thinking that has evolved over a 30-year career in the field. So we asked the users, the children, to log what they did, how long they did it for, where they did it, what's the context, was it in formal or informal setting, was it in the club, a school, etc. And probably most importantly, we capture their voice. So we ask them how it feels, how did the activity session feel, and they've got an opportunity to free write and upload photographs as well. So, I don't know if you ever come across the work of Ed Cope. He did some really interesting work on capturing photography to get young people's narratives and really get under the skin of what is their experience. So, that was why we wanted to put photography on there. And in fact, some of the feedback from the young people who've been using it is, can we have video on there as well? So that's something we're going to throw on in the pipeline as well. So yeah, that's probably a far too long-winded story of where I come from and how the app evolved.
A wonderful journey, and I've had chance to look at the app myself, and I can understand the need to capture social media that young people can be so immersed in. They know it inside out. Are there other techniques that the app uses to maintain their engagement?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. And look, I'm a PE teacher by trade, and that's what I know most about. And rather accidentally, we found ourselves, I say we, my partner and I, who have developed the app, we found ourselves in the world of tech, and we found ourselves in the world of all the development that goes with that. So it's been a really steep learning curve for us, from having an initial idea, which was actually sparked, as interesting that you mentioned social media. It was sparked by watching young people engaging with social media. I'm a dad of 3, just being curious to see how my children engage with social media, but I was also really curious and really enjoyed reading Vicky Goodyear's work at Birmingham University around young people, digital media and physical activity and health habits, and what we learn from there, and then seeing how that space evolves and some of the assumptions that are made, which I really feel very uncomfortable about. I guess as a general rule, I feel uncomfortable whenever children and young people are presented with stuff that is made for and created by adults. So, whether that's designing a coaching session because it works great with the seniors, so let's do it with the under 14s, or whether it's any problem that youth problem, and we look to adults for the solutions. So, we've seen a very, I get it, I guess it's common sense, how do we support kids? We've seen the early emergence of wearable tech for young people. Now, Vicky Goodyear's work, this is a very, very new field, but she was really at the cutting edge. And, she was saying that this is not particularly positive. It's intimidating. It comes from an area of surveillance. In fact, a lot of physical activity research uses the term surveillance. And as a social scientist, I associate surveillance with power imbalance. But that might be getting a bit too heavy too soon. So I'll veer away from Foucault and power and that social science stuff.
No, I'm more than happy to delve into it. I was going to ask you, because having used applications before that tries to tap into generating data from young participants, my experience of it has been that I've ended up having to check up on them and their engagement with it. And largely for those who don't naturally engage with an application like that, me then trying to encourage it just makes it worse for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But it then becomes a vicious cycle. So with the teachers who are using your app, or rather encouraging their young people to use it, how might they avoid that problem of surveillance?
Yeah. So I guess on my last question, I suppose I lost my train of thought a little bit, so apologies for that if it was again a bit rambling. But so we're learning loads, and that was the key point I was making. Or we've put something out there that's not been done before. That we've got some really early adopting schools. We're working with them, and we're working with their students. So in some ways, the answer to your question is a little bit unknown. How do you do that? So some really forward-thinking schools and teachers have created pods of students. They've created miMove ambassadors, where you've got sort of, I don't want to use the word influencers, they're not influencers, but they're kids who have got a social network, and like they might be reminding their kids, or they might be reminding their friends rather. We are going to build in social connectivity into the app, so that the kids, again, drawing down from what are the big drivers, the psychological drivers that generate or that influence behavior, and whether that behavior is in the digital world or the behavior is getting into and staying into physical activity. The more I learn about both those fields, the social domain is absolutely key, and as is the emotional domain. So it needs to be something that is done within a community, that is accepted within the community, which is normalized. And again, I'm really merging digital and physical activity together. I think that the two, it applies equally to both. Any behavior that we're trying to promote with youngsters, they need to feel a sense of autonomy around that. They need to feel in control of that. Again, this is why we're vehemently, opposed to, we're very uncomfortable with wearable tech. You take that control away. So again, drawing from social media, there's big discussions around who's in control of social media, but certainly young people on Instagram feel that they have a degree of autonomy. They feel that they can choose when to post something, when to like something. Now, there's a dark side to that I think psychologists and people who are interested in that are acutely aware of, but learning, putting the user at the heart of what they're doing, and putting it literally in their hands, rather than strapping them up, wiring them up, and saying that we're going to extract that data. So going back to teachers, some teachers are also really creative with the way they're using data. We've built into the app that teachers and coaches can talk directly to the kids on the app in a safe way. And we found, again, really pushing that social connectivity. We've asked young people, why do they post their activity? And one of the things that we get back, and it really varies, it varies on age and where in the world and stuff, but one of the consistent things we get back is validation. That if they've got a strong relationship with a teacher or a coach, they genuinely want to share what they've been up to. Like on a Sunday, they might have gone skateboarding with their friends, and going in and their form tutor in a school, or a teacher that they've got a positive relationship, knowing that is really validating. We also get back that a lot of young people actually like journaling, and they like seeing what they've done, and that also builds a degree of, I guess, it's self-efficacy. It's looking and feeling a sense of pride about their activity journeys. So all of these themes are emerging. We've only been live for just over a year, and obviously the first schools that came on board, it was very hit and miss, and so we've learned loads, and these seem to be the key drivers. And we've also got loads of feedback that we've had as to how to make that better. So we will be building in like variable rewards into the app. When we started, I'm a big fan of self-determination theory, and I was very purist about kids should be intrinsically motivated. As a coach, I couldn't bear like giving rubbish medals out to the kids every time they've been to a festival, and a lot of the time I just want to bin them, to be honest, although I never did. But it wasn't what we were about as in any of the teams that I worked with. So I tried to bring that into the app and say, look, we're just going to be logging activity because it's the activity that's magical. It's the activity that's wonderful, not the tap that goes around it. I've been looking at that, reviewing that. I probably didn't get it quite right. There's probably quite a lot of work that says to arrive at that place, some young people probably need some reward structure. The important thing for us would be, can we wean the users off the reward structure? So it's not about getting the rewards, but it's eventually about doing the activity for whatever reason the young person wants to do the activity. And again, there's a whole conversation around what is motivating them to do the activity.
That's a really good description, first of all. And secondly, it is that tough balance of combating some of the barriers to physical activity that, at least in popular rhetoric, young people are experiencing. Video games gets levied as one of those which perhaps has prompted coaches adopting principles of game design, such as the suggestions offered by Amy Price via the FA. So I think I understand where you're coming from in terms of providing rewards, because of course that happens within video and mobile games. So what are some of the ways you are trying to perhaps bring in that sense of reward without falling into problems of stat chasing?
Well, we're learning and we're looking, and it's an ongoing conversation. So it's probably a little bit early for us to sort of go live with the things that we're thinking about. I think the app manuals all talk about variable rewards. That seems to be the key. That it can't be consistent. It can't be you just get the reward for doing it. It's got to be some sort of hit and miss with it, some sort of excitement with it. But I think you're right about the tensions around digital generally and video gaming in particular. I don't buy into that everything on a digital platform is an enemy and is dangerous, and is, some people would depict it as the work of the devil. I don't buy into that. I think as you said, I think there's features of video gaming, and I'm no expert at all, that are just absolutely brilliant. When you look at, when I saw Fortnite do what they did, you have to ask your question, well, what's going on here? How are they getting millions of kids engaged in this for such a long time? How do they get such high traction? And I think anyone who's curious about pedagogy in any sense, and about connecting with young people, there's just so much to learn from it. Look, there is a dangerous side to it, and we're all aware of the stories of young people who literally can't get off of Fortnite or FIFA or whatever it is that they're playing. But the vast majority of young people, it brings something pretty special to them. And again, when I was looking into this and asking young people and watching young people and how they engage, what was great about Fortnite? That they're connected. They're connected to their friends. They're talking. It's a very social experience. It's a very exciting experience. It's full of uncertainty. Well, that's a lot. There's a huge crossover there to what goes on with sport. The uncertainty of outcome, being able to be on your metaphorical toes all the time, the adrenaline. There's a huge amount to learn, and we trying to learn from that. As far as what rewards we'd have, we will try to. It's an overused term, and it's probably a bit of an inaccurate term at times, but we will try to gamify a little bit what happens when kids post activities.
Interesting you bring up Fortnite. I was working in Saudi Arabia as a football coach, and one of the parents was concerned about the time that his kid was spending on Fortnite, and I happened to walk into the leisure centre there that provided a couple of PlayStations, and there were 4 of the boys that I coached playing Fortnite in there. And just as you say, the things that really struck me was the peer problem solving that was going on. You've got one lad sat way over on the right and another one way over on the left, and they're shouting across to each other to solve the problems that were occurring in front of their eyes. And so it was interesting to then go back to that parent and say, look, I understand that of course you need to limit the time that they're spending on this. However, there are some things that they are developing here that are positive. Just to shift a little bit, we've spoken about some of the challenges to young people engagement with the app. Have you experienced any challenges to teacher engagement with it?
That's a great question. So the challenges can be multifaceted, I suppose. One is structural. We're the first to market something that, the teachers who get it, like they're like, that's fantastic. Our goal. And I think you're hard pushed to find a physical educator anywhere in the world that won't pay lip service at least. But let's just give everyone the benefit of the doubt and say that they actually get up and they go to work to achieve a mission, which is to get young people into physical activity. And I'm just going to leave it there because there's lots of becauses that normally follows on that you got to be into physical activity because, and I'm not a big fan of the becauses. I think they make things very complicated. So the goal is to get young people into physical activity so that physical activity brings something good to their lives. So really early adopting teachers who have run with this is like, what you can tell us on this app, if our students log their activity, I can see on the dashboard, I can see at a glance, basically whether our program is doing what it says on the tin. And with that data, we can then review, reflect, we can celebrate, we can support, we can tweak things, we can listen, we can set up case study groups, we can talk to the students. It's really powerful data. So what might be the barriers? Well, there's digital platform barriers. It's getting school digital platforms are getting increasingly crowded. So some schools are wary about giving something else for the young people and the parents to log into. There's occasionally there's cost barriers, although we've priced it much cheaper than any other edutech that we can see on the market to try to take that barrier away. But I guess some people are wary that it's going to create more work for them. We've built in a really easy to use assessment tool as well, which really tries to capture those big picture questions that I referred to earlier. So I think there probably is a case, and we're talking, we've got an insight group of around 10 teachers from 10 different schools, all very different schools as well. And, when it's used effectively, it's actually hugely time saving. But I think any time you're trying to introduce something new, there's inevitably some questions. And one of the questions we get reasonably regularly is, how do I know if the students are telling the truth? Which is a fascinating question, and really goes to the heart of, or speaks so much to how we perceive teacher, coach, child, student relationships, and where trust and integrity and honesty comes into that. It's quite a miserable question, actually, thinking that your students are going to lie. And there's so much data and so much research that actually shows that people, whether they're young people or adults, are actually incredibly honest. And the data that we're seeing from around the world, by and large, when a young person is entering data that's not truthful, it stands out a mile. You've got a 10-year-old going on a 3.5-hour run. It's like, it's not going to happen. Or a child posting 15 sessions a day. But it really does stand out. So there's probably much bigger conversations to have with that youngster that go way beyond physical activity, like around integrity and honesty. And we ask, well, what's the motivation to be dishonest? Because we actually specify that the app must be used in a harm-free way. And we would consider publishing young people's physical activity data in any shape or form like i.e. a league table, we would consider that harmful, and that would actually be in breach of our terms and conditions. This is about each young person's physical activity journey, and that should be absolutely respected. And our role as adults is to support that journey wherever they're starting from. So, so there's some of the barriers that we've encountered.
In the States, a couple of times I had exposure to Stat Sports, which I think is a fantastic piece of technology. But again, it's the orientation of the coach that dictates how they use it. And stat hunting was a massive problem, especially for high school athletes over there who, if they play in a varsity team and club teams, they tend to be in danger of overtraining anyway. Yeah. But if it becomes this, I did more running than you, I was quicker than you, it increases the chances of those kids wanting to push themselves without appropriate rest.
Yep.
I suspect then it's really about the teacher orientation, and it's clear that this application has so much underpinning it in terms of the principles you want it to promote. What would you direct new teachers coming into physical education in terms of learning more about their role with physical activity engagement?
Well, that's a question we grapple with, but very regularly at my work at university. But if I could just pick up on two things before I dive into that. I think the overtraining, overuse scenario is really prevalent, and amongst some communities and with some young people. You know, the general discourse is that young people today, they're not as active as they used to be. There's not a huge amount of evidence to suggest that that is the case, but that is the general discourse that's widely accepted. But within that, of course, there are cohorts of young people, which, you know, the data suggests tends to be boys, not exclusively, but tends to be boys from more privileged backgrounds who are actually amongst the most active young people that probably in history, and so the risk of overuse is also something that as we develop the app, we will be using the data to flag up potential risks. And I say potential because, you know, all of these stats tell a story, and it's only really when you get into the qualitative stuff, you know, by instinct, I'm always about the qualitative stuff. I'm not really a numbers person, to be honest. So the numbers are just a way into seeing what's the story. You know, where we've had really high traction with miMove, you know, the first thing we do is try and get on the phone or a video call with the teachers and say, this is fantastic. Like, what is it you're doing? Tell me the story of what you're doing. And that's the really interesting stuff. The other thing around using stats to validate one's efforts, for a young person to validate one's efforts to where success is defined as I'm doing better than you, or, you know, to have ego-oriented motivation, you know, is highly, highly problematic anyway. So I absolutely, you know, appreciate what you're saying there, Tim, that if we use anything, and it doesn't have to be digital, even if we create a culture that is all about success equals being better than you, as an individual or as a team, and then, you know, there's so much brilliant research that shows that, well, those youngsters will probably not be running around doing what they're doing at 10 when they're 16. They probably won't be there. So, yeah, creating the culture where any tool is used positively, and creating a culture which is genuinely about the young people, you know, that's the holy grail, isn't it, of coaching and teaching. Your question was about where would I direct new teachers? We live in an age where information has never been more readily accessible. So I think it's really about knowing what information you're looking for. And so the question I'm hearing, I don't know if it's the question you meant, but you could tell me to stop if it's not. The question I'm hearing is, to be a really good teacher or coach, what is it you need to know? And we really, really grapple with that. So most of our students who come on teacher education programs, they think they're going to learn about all the techniques and tactics and skills and like the rule book. They think they're going to learn the rule book. They think they're going to learn the coaching manual. But instead of doing that, they probably know that for one or two sports, but they think they're going to know that for a whole range of activities. And I guess our message nowadays is, yeah, you need to know that. But, you know, there are a lot of people in teacher education draw sort of chefing analogies. I don't know why, it always tends to be in the kitchen. So, you know, if you take like a top chef, do they know how to source great ingredients? Yes, they do. But where the magic happens is what they do with those ingredients. And, you know, if you just, you know, I could throw some onions and tomatoes and garlic in a pan and create one thing, but the top pasta chef will create the most wonderful tomato sauce. And it's way you know, they might cut the onion, whatever it is, but you get the idea. I'm going to get out of the kitchen now and back into the matters that we're talking about. Now, that means knowing, well, maybe I'm going back into the kitchen. It means knowing how the client wants to eat that pasta. So that means you need to know loads about the people you're working with. So we do an awful lot around the psychosocial world of physical education and youth sport, an awful lot. We turn to a whole range of theoretical perspectives, psychological perspectives and theories. We mainly around self-determination theory, I guess, would be our big driver. But then we also look a lot about where are the youngsters coming from and how important are their stories. And the big picture, we do a lot on gender and race and defining ability. We do an awful lot really trying to problematize and question what success is. So we talk a lot about what do you think a physically educated person looks like. We challenge the relationship between physical education and health, which we think is very problematic. And we also challenge the relationship between physical education and high performance sport. Our centre that we have is actually called, as you said in the intro, is the Centre for PE, Sport and Activity. And we actually bring them all together with an acronym of PISA. And we talk about PISA all the time. And the thinking behind that is traditionally and for a very long time, PE, sport and physical activity have been seen as three very separate component parts. And, you know, we're taking inspiration from work of brilliant woman called Kathy Armour, who also works at Birmingham University, actually, and a few other people. You know, we've looked at that and said that it's an irrelevant conversation. We don't see the relevance of it. And so our simple rule is that if there's a responsible adult working with young people, then it's always only ever about the development, the learning and the progress of that young person. So that means, you know, is it about successful competitive outcomes? For us, no, it's never about that until that young person is engaged, has the maturity, social, emotional, physical stage where that's a really meaningful experience for them. That doesn't mean that we absolutely shy away from ever doing activities that are us versus you, but we're doing those to create a learning environment, and the success is evidence of learning within that environment rather than the outcome. You know, have I ever seen kids on a basketball court not try to score a basket? No, never. I've never seen kids playing football who don't want to deny the opposition a goal scoring opportunity. I've never ever seen that, because the context creates that, but we're using that specifically for learning purposes. Likewise, you know, if we're looking at physical activity, to break the direct link between physical activity, you're doing this because it's healthy, we seriously question whether that's at all motivating for young people, whether health information is a driver of behaviour. But it's a great opportunity to learn about oneself, how we respond to various stimuli, how do we respond to fatigue, how do we respond to others around us, how do we like moving, how do we not like moving. all of those things I think are brilliant learning opportunities.
Another fascinating answer, and I suppose my intention with that question around where might you direct teachers was more about the use of additional support like your application. And I think we've seen, with my background in football coaching, a big move towards player-centered practice, with perhaps a missing tenet of actually the coach is very much involved in that. The pendulum swung towards the game is the teacher type maxims, and really missing the importance of the coach or the teacher being truly involved in the development of the young people in a co-directed way.
Yeah.
So I draw on Jowett's work around a coach-athlete centered approach, acknowledging the dynamic relationship between the two at its core. So it was good to hear you speak about the use of the application and some of the ideas that the young people were coming up with, particularly in terms of using social media, and then your response to that and in kind of a co-construction of what this application might mean. Obviously, Greg, you spent a lot of time in schools as a head of PE, and as a part of that role, you will have had to develop those around you. What were some of the challenges you faced in terms of getting those teachers around you to understand a little bit more about all of the principles we've been talking about?
Well, that's a tough question, and I think with any, like, if you're looking at that from within a team perspective, as a team of coaches or a team of teachers, then I suppose the most important thing for me is purpose. And do we have a shared purpose? Do we have a common purpose? How's that communicated? What do we do with that purpose, and how's it played out? And that's a purpose that we would keep returning to, keep reviewing. And it's a purpose where it needs to be arrived at through a listening exercise, through constantly listening. It's probably not something that comes as a result of an hour's thought session and all right, we've done it, we've got it. You've got to keep coming back to that. So I think as I progress through my career, that's become more prevalent, more challenging. Really, I know it's massively overquoted, but the whole Simon Sinek, what's your why, is probably true, but what's your why over a period of time? And then I guess for me, I think looking back, it was probably about finding humility, to be honest, without wishing to sound too corny. And there's been, really capturing the critical incidents which are normally associated with messing up, to be honest. And we live in a culture where messing up is really frowned upon, but it is such an important part of learning, whether you're professional learning or indeed whether it's the learning of the young people. It's those times when it goes wrong and how we respond. So, if I can flesh that out a little bit, my first jobs were in a place called Summertown, which is just behind King's Cross Station in the middle of London. And then I moved to East London to an area called Bethnal Green. And there were places that still hold a very special place in my heart. And but my upbringing was very different to almost all the young people I was working with. And there's big stories in there. There's big issues to really grapple with about why was I doing what I was doing. And again, this is what I really, looking back, I wish I had better mentoring to help me accelerate my thought processes to make sense of that. Because I think sport and physical education and physical activity, I think gets very, very confused. There's such competing agendas. There's policy makers who are saying, we've got to do this for one thing. It normally goes back to that health and obesity discourse. And as I touched upon before, I don't really buy into that. I think it's very, very problematic. I think an awful lot of what we do to kids, quote unquote, is always about fixing young people. And so straight away we're talking about deficits before we've even gone onto the court or onto the field or the classroom. And that's really hard where I was working with young people was in very deprived communities, and they were the communities who policymakers say need the most fixing. But I was working in communities that I found vibrant. Look, don't get me wrong, I'm not romanticising this. It's not without its challenges, but they were vibrant. A lot of the kids were absolutely brilliant in a way, exhibiting a brilliance which is not really formalized and doesn't get credit in informal channels. But they were incredibly creative and they were incredibly resilient. And I would back them, all the way. The kids who are working and living and socializing and functioning in where I was working in inner urban areas, the most resilient kids I've ever come across in my life. And again, the public discourse is, oh, kids today don't have any resilience and we've got to do loads of work to fix that. So really the humility of not trying to make kids like you, the humility that it's not about you, it's not your ego, the humility to ask, where do your thoughts and beliefs come from, and are they fixed, or is that playing out? The humility to ask. So, yeah, two things, I suppose, for I don't even think it is for younger people. I think, I'm still finding out loads of this stuff every time I go into schools or go to, see great young football coaches. I'm learning as much from them as they are from me. So are we clear on purpose, and do we have the humility to really stay open and really keep our eyes open and see real brilliance amongst the kids? And I'm not talking brilliance as high performance sport. I remember really early in my career, a wonderful teacher once said to me, we were talking this stuff about teaching technique and, textbook football, and I can't even remember what manual it was, but loads of talk about the Cruyff turn and stuff like that. And he said to me, one, these kids never even heard of Johan Cruyff, so there's no relevance there. And two, why on earth would I be bothered in them replicating Johan Cruyff's turn? I want to see Ahmed's turn, or I want to see Sarah's turn. I want to see how they're turning. So the whole notion of replication, can we create and facilitate a space where they can take risks, they can mess up, they can learn, and we can, really focus on the process of taking the risk. And, that's like a punch the air moment. Yeah, all right, it didn't come off, but wow, what you tried to do there, that was quality. What do we now need to do to see if we can refine that and apply that? But hey, that was really cool. So those sort of conversations, I think, were certainly what we encourage our trainee teachers to engage with.
Another useful answer again, Greg. Thank you. I really appreciate your time today. I did just have one more question for you. If you could have an audience with just one person, who would that be?
Oh, gosh. Wow. That's a huge question. It wouldn't be very sporty, I think, these days. I've become increasingly more interested in sort of how we draw into sport and PE from outside. So I'm really interested in the work of people like Bell Hooks, American black feminist writer. I'm really interested in the education critical race theorist Gloria Ladson-Billing. I've been really privileged to be exposed to a whole range of philosophers that bypass my formal education. So yeah, but I'll go with Bell Hooks to start with, because what a fascinating person.
That's a new one to me, so I'll need to check those books out. So thank you for offering that, and again, thank you for your time. Where is it that people can find you and your work?
So miMove is miMoveapp.com, and I'm greg@miMoveApp.com. On Twitter, I'm at Greg_Dryer, I believe. That should probably suffice. I think I probably could take the
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. I'll put your contact details and links in the description to the podcast so that people can reach out to you. Greg, thank you and welcome to the tribe.
Thank you. Really, real pleasure to speak to you, and best of luck with the next stage of your super exciting journey, and do keep in touch. I can't wait to hear how you're getting on.
That's it for this week in episode 5. My thanks to Greg for his time and candidness. As with all the guests we've had, there's been plenty of take-homes for us. You can contact me via email, thedevelopertribe@gmail.com, or find us on social media platforms, links below. The music you are listening to is by BB Phoenix. Thank you for being here. Look forward to having you with us at the tribe again soon.